In April of 1970, a man named Earl Maddox walked into a Dodge dealership in Toledo, Ohio, with $3,200 in cash and drove home in a brand new Charger R/T. He was 31 years old. He had been saving for 4 years. The car was black. Not dark blue, not dark green, black the way a highway looks at 2 in the morning when there's no one else on it. The salesman called it formal black. Earl just called it the car. He drove it for 22 years. In the summer of 1992, he parked it in the garage behind his house on Maplewood Avenue, pulled a green canvas tarp over it, and never drove it again. He told one person why. His grandson Michael was 9 years old at the time. The car is still there. Earl Maddox was born in 1939 outside Dayton and came to Toledo at 19 to work at the Chrysler plant on Jeep Parkway. He spent 31 years in the drivetrain section, torquing differential housings and checking tolerances on rear axle assemblies. He knew cars from the inside out the way people who build things know them, not from brochures, but from weight and resistance and the sound a part makes when it's seated correctly. He was not a man who talked much about what he wanted. His wife Carol said later that the Charger was the only thing she'd ever seen him want out loud. He had watched one roll off his line in February of 1970, a black R/T with the 446 pack, and followed it with his eyes until it cleared the floor. He asked the foreman what the VIN was. He asked where it was going. 2 months later, a different black R/T was sitting on the lot at Miller Dodge on Monroe Street. It wasn't the same car. But it was close enough. The 446 pack was not a subtle engine. 3 two-barrel carburetors sitting on top of a 440 cubic inch block that had been designed, in its racing form, to do one thing: make power at high RPM without apology. Earl wasn't a racer. He didn't drag the car. But he knew what was under the hood every time he touched the throttle, and that knowledge was a thing in itself. He drove it home on a Tuesday afternoon in April. Carol was standing on the porch. She looked at the car for a long time. Then she said, "We're going to need to talk about the insurance." Earl said, "Yes." Then he went inside and made coffee. For 22 years, the Charger was simply part of how Earl Maddox moved through the world. He drove it to work. He drove it to his sister's house in Findlay on Sunday afternoons in the summer with the windows down. He drove it to his son's baseball games and his daughter's school plays, and once, in the fall of 1979, all the way to the Upper Peninsula of Michigan and back because Carol had read about the colors. He was not a man who trailered his car to shows and stood next to it in a polo shirt. He drove it. The car accumulated 94,000 miles over those years, and Earl maintained it the way he maintained everything, methodically, without drama. Oil every 3,000 miles. Plugs when they needed them. He rebuilt the carburetor himself in the spring of 1981 on the kitchen table while Carol was at her sister's, with parts spread across the linoleum and a diagram from a Chilton manual propped against the sugar bowl. She came home to metering rods and gaskets laid out in rows and didn't say a word about it. Michael remembered the smell of the car. Gasoline and warm vinyl and something underneath, both of those things that he couldn't name at 9 and couldn't name now. He remembered sitting in the passenger seat as a small boy while Earl drove, the hood stretching out ahead of them like a runway, the engine doing something under there that you didn't just hear but felt low in your chest. He remembered thinking the car was alive. The Charger never won any awards. It was never in a magazine. It was a working car, driven by a working man, and it showed the kind of wear that comes from years of honest use. A small dent in the rear quarter. Never fixed. Touch-up paint on the driver's door that didn't quite match. A small crack in the dashboard pad above the defroster vents. Earl knew every scratch. He put most of them there. In the winter of 1991, Carol Maddox was diagnosed with cancer. She was treated for 14 months at Toledo Hospital. Earl drove her to every appointment in a blue Ford pickup he bought specifically for that purpose, because the Charger's low seats had become difficult for her and because he didn't want to bring that car into the hospital parking lot, for reasons he didn't explain to anyone. Carol died in March of 1992. That summer, on a Saturday morning in late June, Earl drove the Charger out of the garage for the last time. He took it to the end of Maplewood and back, less than half a mile. He pulled it into the garage, sat in it for a few minutes with the engine off and the garage door open. Then he got out, unfolded the green canvas tarp he'd kept on a shelf since 1974, and spread it over the car. Michael was in the yard that day. He was 9 years old. He watched Earl work the tarp over the front of the car, the roof, the trunk, tucking the edges down the sides with the same care he gave everything. He asked Earl why. Earl looked at the garage for a moment. He said, "Some things you don't use up." He didn't say anything else about it. But before he went inside, he put his hand briefly on Michael's shoulder and said, "Don't sell her." Michael was 9. He nodded. He didn't entirely understand. Earl went inside and made lunch. Earl Maddox had a stroke in the spring of 2002. He spent the following year and a half in a slow diminishment that no one who loved him wanted to watch, but all of them did. He died in November of 2003. He was 64 years old. He left the house on Maplewood to Michael's mother. He left the contents of the garage to Michael. Michael drove up from Columbus on a gray Saturday in December, 2 weeks after the funeral, when the family had mostly scattered and the house had gone quiet. He parked in the driveway and sat in his car for a while before getting out. The garage door hadn't been opened in 11 years. He opened it. The tarp had gone stiff in the cold. He pulled it back from the front slowly, the way you'd pull a sheet back to see what's underneath. The chrome on the front bumper had oxidized at the edges. A thin film of dust covered the hood. But the paint beneath it was still there, still black, still deep. The driver's seat still held the shape of Earl's body in the bolster. 22 years of use compressed into the vinyl like a record, like something written down. Michael stood in the cold garage for a long time. Then he covered it back up. Word got out the way it always does. A neighbor mentioned it to someone at a car show. That person called a dealer in Michigan. The dealer called Michael in the spring of 2004. The first offer was $45,000. Michael said no. The offers came in intervals over the following years, from different directions, with different justifications. A private collector from Tennessee offered $90,000 in 2007. A California broker called in 2011 with a buyer offering $140,000, with a cashier's check available within 48 hours. In 2019, a representative from a major auction house flew in from Phoenix and sat across a table from Michael in a conference room. He outlined what a numbers-matching 1970 Charger R/T446 pack with documented single-family ownership could bring on the auction floor. He used the phrase north of $280,000. He said it twice. Michael listened to the whole presentation. He said no. The man from Phoenix asked what number would change his mind. "There isn't one," he said. The man looked at him the way people look when they suspect someone is negotiating. Michael wasn't negotiating. Michael is in his early 40s now. He lives in Columbus. He drives a practical car. He is not, by any measure, a wealthy man. There have been years, a medical bill, a period of unemployment, a flooded basement, when $280,000 would have changed the shape of his life in ways that are difficult to overstate. He has thought about that. He thinks about it still. The house on Maplewood was sold in 2009. Michael arranged for the garage to be transferred separately. He pays a monthly fee to maintain access. He visits twice a year. He opens the garage, lifts the edge of the tarp, checks for moisture damage. He doesn't start the engine. He doesn't sit in the seat. He covers it back up and closes the door. People ask him what he's waiting for. He doesn't have a good answer. He knows what Earl meant when he said some things you don't use up. He's not sure he could explain it to someone who didn't already understand it. The car sits in the dark on Maplewood Avenue. The paint is still black beneath the dust. The driver's seat still holds the shape of the man who drove it for 22 years, to work, to baseball games, to his sister's house in Findlay on summer Sundays, all the way to the Upper Peninsula of Michigan in the fall when the colors were right. The engine hasn't turned over in 32 years. If you understand why, you don't need me to explain it. And if you don't, I'm not sure I can. Subscribe if this is the kind of story you want more of. There are a lot of garages in this country. A lot of tarps. A lot of things people kept for reasons that don't fit on a price tag. We'll get to them.